May 16, 1943, 9:38 in the evening, RAF Scampton, Lincolnshire, England. In the fading light, 19 Avro Lancaster bombers waited on the runway. Their 4 Rolls-Royce Merlin engines were already warming, sending steady vibrations through the concrete. These aircraft belonged to a newly formed unit, number 617 Squadron of the Royal Air Force. Its commander was Wing Commander Guy Gibson, 25 years old, already a veteran of more than 170 combat sorties. But tonight was not a normal bombing mission. Inside each Lancaster rested a weapon that had never been used in war before. A cylindrical device weighing more than 9,000 pounds. Its official code name was Upkeep. The target was not a factory, rail yard, or airfield. The target was water. Specifically, 3 massive dams deep inside the industrial Ruhr region of Germany. The Mohne Dam, the Eder Dam, the Sorpe. Dammed together, they controlled enormous reservoirs that powered hydroelectric plants, cooled steel factories, and supplied water to one of the most critical industrial zones in Europe. The Ruhr Valley produced tanks, artillery, synthetic fuel, and large quantities of steel for the German war machine. British planners understood a simple strategic reality. Destroy the dams, and water itself would become a weapon. If the reservoirs burst, tens of billions of gallons would surge down narrow valleys, wiping out power stations, rail lines, bridges, and industrial plants. Factories would lose electricity, transportation would halt. Repair crews would struggle for months. But the dams were built to survive conventional bombing. The Mohne Dam alone rose 130 feet above the valley floor and stretched more than 2,000 feet across the reservoir. Its base was over 110 feet thick. Normal bombs exploding on the surface would do little damage. Barnes Wallis, a British engineer working for Vickers Armstrong, believed the solution was not to strike the top of the dam. The explosion had to occur underwater. Water transmits shock waves far more efficiently than air. If a bomb could detonate directly against the dam wall beneath the surface, the pressure wave might fracture the massive concrete structure. But the Germans had anticipated torpedo attacks. Steel torpedo nets protected the dams. Wallis designed a weapon to defeat them. The Upkeep bomb would spin backwards at approximately 500 revolutions per minute when released. When dropped at exactly 60 feet above the water, and at a speed of 230 miles per hour, the spinning cylinder would skip across the surface like a stone. It would bounce over torpedo nets, then strike the dam wall. The backspin would cause it to sink vertically alongside the concrete face before exploding at a depth of about 30 feet. The physics were elegant. The execution was terrifyingly difficult. Lancaster crews would have to approach the dams at night, flying only 60 feet above the water. Too high, and the bomb would break apart. Too low, and the aircraft could strike the reservoir surface. Speed had to remain almost perfectly constant. Distance from the dam wall had to be exactly 425 yards. Wallis created a simple triangular wooden sight for the bomb aimer. When the 2 towers of a dam aligned perfectly inside the frame, the aircraft was at the correct release distance. Altitude measurement required another improvised device. 2 spotlights were mounted under the aircraft nose and tail. When the beams crossed into a single point on the water surface, the bomber was exactly 60 feet above the reservoir. These methods were crude, but they worked. For weeks in early 1943, Lancaster crews practiced over British reservoirs. Aircraft roared across water surfaces at dangerously low altitude. More than once, practice bombs skipped wildly across lakes or broke apart. Precision had to become instinct. By mid-May, the squadron was ready. The attack force would fly in 3 groups. The first wave would strike the Mohne Dam, the largest and most heavily defended target. The second wave would attack the Eder Dam. The third wave would remain in reserve. Navigation itself was dangerous. To avoid German radar detection, the bombers would cross the North Sea at extremely low altitude, then fly across the Netherlands and western Germany, often at heights below 100 feet. High-voltage power lines, church towers, and flak batteries all waited in the darkness. Even before reaching the dams, losses were expected. At 9:39 in the evening, the first Lancaster began rolling down the runway. One after another, the bombers lifted into the dusk. 19 aircraft, 1 experimental weapon, 3 dams deep in enemy territory. If the attack succeeded, the Ruhr industrial network could suffer massive disruption. If it failed, months of planning and engineering would vanish into the night sky. And the crews of 617 Squadron were about to discover that the most dangerous part of the mission had not even begun. Somewhere ahead, hidden in the dark valleys of Germany, stood the Mohne Dam, guarded by anti-aircraft guns, protected by floodlights, and waiting for aircraft that had to fly lower than almost any bomber had ever flown in combat. May 16, 1943, 12:15 in the morning. The first Lancaster of No. 6, 117 Squadron, approached the Mohne Reservoir in western Germany. The aircraft flew barely 100 feet above the water. At the controls sat Wing Commander Guy Gibson. His Lancaster carried the squadron code AJG. The Mohne Dam was heavily defended compared to the other targets. Two stone towers stood on the crest of the structure, and multiple anti-aircraft positions surrounded the valley. German defenders expected conventional bombing attacks from high altitude. They did not expect heavy bombers to approach at tree level in darkness. Gibson descended even lower as the aircraft crossed the reservoir. The bomb aimer switched on the twin spotlights under the Lancaster fuselage. Two bright cones of light struck the black surface of the water. At first, the beams appeared separate. Then slowly they moved toward each other. When the two circles touched and merged into a single bright point, the aircraft was exactly 60 feet above the reservoir. Speed stabilized at approximately 230 miles per hour. Behind the bomb bay doors, the cylindrical upkeep weapon spun rapidly. An electric motor had accelerated the bomb to the required backspin just minutes earlier. Ahead, the dark outline of the Mohne Dam grew larger. The bomb aimer positioned the wooden triangular sight toward the two towers. Distance had to be exact, 425 yards. Too early and the bomb would lose momentum. Too late and it would strike the dam wall before skipping. German searchlights suddenly ignited across the reservoir. The aircraft was exposed. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire from the towers and shoreline positions. Tracers streaked across the night sky. Gibson held the Lancaster steady. The bomb aimer watched the towers through the sight. Closer, closer. The towers aligned perfectly within the triangular frame. Bomb gone. The upkeep cylinder dropped from the Lancaster and struck the reservoir surface. One bounce, two, three. Then the weapon slammed against the dam wall and disappeared beneath the water. Gibson pulled the Lancaster sharply upward and banked away from the dam. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a violent underwater explosion erupted beside the dam face. A column of water rose hundreds of feet into the air. But when the spray settled, the massive concrete wall remained intact. The first attempt had failed. Now the other aircraft had to repeat the attack. The second Lancaster in the formation was piloted by Flight Lieutenant John Hopgood. As Hopgood aircraft approached the dam, anti-aircraft fire intensified. German gunners had now identified the unusual attack profile. Hopgood Lancaster was struck by flak during the run. Fuel ignited near the wing. Despite the damage, Hopgood continued the bombing approach. The bomb released successfully, but the damaged aircraft could not maintain altitude. It crashed beyond the dam moments later. The upkeep bomb detonated near the structure, but again the dam survived. A third Lancaster began its attack run. This aircraft was piloted by Flight Lieutenant Harold Martin. Martin aircraft held the required 60-foot altitude and 230-mile-per-hour speed with remarkable precision. The bomb skipped across the reservoir and struck the dam. Another explosion thundered through the valley. Still, the wall held. From a tactical perspective, the problem was clear. The Mohne Dam base was extremely thick. Explosions had to strike the structure repeatedly at the correct depth before fractures would begin forming inside the concrete. Each bombing run also forced aircraft to fly directly into concentrated anti-aircraft fire. To protect the attacking bombers, Gibson performed a dangerous maneuver. He flew his own Lancaster across the dam face repeatedly, drawing the German gunners toward him. Tracer fire followed his aircraft through the darkness. This distraction allowed other Lancasters to line up their bombing runs. One by one, more aircraft attacked. Another upkeep weapon exploded beside the dam, then another. Water geysers climbed into the sky. Still, the concrete barrier held against the pressure. But inside the structure, cracks were beginning to form. The next Lancaster in position was flown by Flight Lieutenant David Maltby. Maltby aircraft began its approach shortly after 12:50 in the morning. The reservoir was now covered in drifting smoke from explosions and anti-aircraft fire. Floodlights illuminated the dam crest. Gunners continued firing, yet Maltby held the precise bombing altitude, 60 feet. Speed steady, 230 miles per hour. The triangular sight aligned the towers. The bomb released. The cylinder skipped across the water with perfect trajectory. One bounce, two, three. Then the weapon struck the dam and sank along the concrete face. Several seconds passed. Then the detonation occurred. The explosion erupted deep against the wall of the Mohne Dam. This time the shock wave traveled through the water and into the massive concrete structure. Observers aboard the circling Lancaster saw something different. A section of the dam face began to collapse. Concrete blocks fractured and tumbled outward. Then a dark opening appeared. Within seconds, the breach widened dramatically. Millions of tons of reservoir water began forcing its way through the gap. The Mohne Dam had finally broken, but the operation was only half complete. Dozens of miles away, another enormous reservoir still stood untouched. The Eder Dam, and the bombers heading there would soon discover a new problem. The valley surrounding that target made the Mohne attack look simple. May 17, 1943. 1:38 in the morning. Two Lancaster bombers from No. 6, 117 Squadron, approached the Eder Reservoir. The aircraft flew along a narrow valley in central Germany. Unlike the Mohne Dam, the Eder Dam had almost no heavy anti-aircraft defenses. The reason was geography. The dam stood deep inside a winding valley surrounded by steep hills. German planners believed the terrain itself protected the structure from air attack. But that same terrain now created a severe problem for the attacking bombers. There was almost no straight approach path. To reach the dam, a Lancaster had to descend into the valley, curve around hills, then line up with the structure only seconds before releasing the bomb. The first bomber was piloted by Flight Lieutenant Guy Gibson, who had left the Mohne target and flown toward Eder with the remaining aircraft. He circled the reservoir once, studying the approach. Moonlight reflected off the water surface. The dam wall stretched across the valley floor, massive and silent, but the hills forced an awkward approach angle. A Lancaster bomber weighed more than 60,000 pounds when loaded. At 230 miles per hour and 60 feet altitude, even a slight turn could disrupt the precise bomb release conditions. Gibson judged the risk carefully. He ordered another pilot to attempt the attack. The next aircraft in position was commanded by Flight Lieutenant John McCarthy. McCarthy aircraft had flown more than 300 miles across occupied territory to reach this point. Fuel was limited. There would be only a few attempts. McCarthy began the first approach. The Lancaster descended between two hills and lined up with the reservoir, but the turn toward the dam was too sharp. The aircraft climbed slightly to avoid the hillside, breaking the required altitude. The attack run had to be aborted. McSense pulled away and climbed back into the valley for another attempt. The second approach began minutes later. Again, the bomber dropped into the valley. Again, the aircraft struggled to align perfectly with the dam wall. The release distance passed before the bomb aimer could confirm the towers inside the triangular site. Another aborted run. Each attempt consumed fuel and increased the risk of dawn interception by German fighters, but the mission objective remained clear. If the Eder Dam survived, much of the Ruhr industrial water supply would remain intact. McCarthy prepared for a third attempt. This time he adjusted the flight path earlier, entering the valley from a slightly wider angle. The Lancaster leveled out above the reservoir surface. The spotlights crossed into a single bright point on the water, 60 feet. Speed stabilized, 230 miles per hour. The dam towers aligned inside the triangular site. Bomb gone. The upkeep weapon struck the reservoir surface. It bounced cleanly across the water. One bounce. Two. Then the cylinder struck the dam wall and sank. The bomber climbed sharply away from the valley. Seconds passed. Then the underwater explosion erupted beside the dam face. A massive water column shot into the air. At first, the structure appeared unchanged, but within moments, observers noticed movement along the crest. The concrete face fractured. A section of the dam began collapsing outward. Then the wall broke. Water surged through the opening in a violent torrent. The Eder Dam reservoir held more than 200 million tons of water. That water now rushed down the valley in a destructive flood wave. Villages, roads, and rail bridges lay directly in its path. From a strategic perspective, the consequences were immediate. The destruction of the Mohne and Eder dams released tens of billions of gallons of water into the Ruhr region. Hydroelectric power stations lost generation capacity. Industrial plants temporarily shut down due to flooding and power shortages. Railway lines and bridges were damaged or washed away. Several coal mines and steel facilities were forced to suspend operations. German authorities mobilized more than 7,000 workers and soldiers to repair the damage. Many of those workers were diverted from other war industries. Yet the long-term strategic effect proved more limited than British planners had hoped. German engineers responded with remarkable speed. Within weeks, emergency repairs began restoring water flow and electrical power. Temporary bridges replaced destroyed transport routes. Factories gradually resumed production. But Operation Chastise achieved something beyond the physical damage. It demonstrated that precision engineering and specialized weapons could strike deep inside the German industrial system. The raid also established the reputation of No. 617 Squadron. In the months ahead, the unit would become one of the most specialized strike forces in the Royal Air Force. They would attack battleships, submarine pens, and hardened fortifications using advanced weapons designed by Barnes Wallis. Yet the cost of the operation was heavy. 19 Lancasters had departed England that night. Only 11 returned. 53 aircrew members were killed. 3 became prisoners of war. But the images of the breached dams and the flooded Ruhr valleys traveled quickly through Allied command structures. They proved that strategic infrastructure could be attacked with precision, not just mass bombing, and that lesson would influence air warfare for the rest of the war. By sunrise, on May 17, 1943, 2 of the largest dams in Germany had collapsed. Water continued racing down the valleys toward the Ruhr industrial basin. Factories stood in darkness. Rail lines lay broken. And the crews who survived the raid were already flying back toward England, carrying the knowledge that one of the most daring precision attacks of the war had just taken place.